They say the walls have ears. But at Hinterkaifeck, the silence screamed louder than any ghost. It wasn't just the isolation miles from the nearest village. It was a feeling. A coldness that seeped into your bones, a sense of being watched even when you were alone. I know because I was there. I saw what happened. And I'm still haunted by the silence. The winter of 1922 clamped down on Bavaria like a frozen fist. Snow, thick and unrelenting, had been falling for days, piling against the windows of Hinterkaifeck farm like icy shrouds. The wind, a constant, mournful presence, whipped across the fields, carrying with it the bite of the approaching winter and a low, unsettling whine that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the old farmhouse. My name is Jacob and I was 17 that winter. My older brother Hans and I, along with our father, had been hired to help with the late harvest, a task that seemed increasingly futile as the snow continued to accumulate. Hinterkaifeck. Even the name whispered of isolation, tucked away as it was in a secluded hollow, miles from the nearest village of Wang. The farm itself was a collection of weathered buildings, huddled together against the elements like frightened animals. The main house, its paint peeling and timbers groaning in the wind, seemed to sag under the weight of years and unspoken secrets. The barn, larger and even more imposing, loomed in the background, a dark maw promising unknown depths. The Gruber family, Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their daughter Victoria, her husband Karl Huber, and their two young children Joseph and Kazilia, were peculiar. Quiet, almost unnervingly so. They moved about the farm with a hushed, almost spectral quality, rarely speaking to each other and even less to us. Andreas, a tall, gaunt man with a perpetually furrowed brow, seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Kazilia, his wife, was a small, frail woman with eyes that seemed to hold a deep, unspoken sadness. Victoria, their daughter, was a pale, nervous creature, always flitting around the farmyard like a frightened bird. Karl Huber, her husband, was a burly, taciturn man, whose presence seemed to fill any room with a quiet tension. And the children? Joseph, a bright-eyed boy of 7, and little Kazilia, a toddler barely old enough to walk, were eerily quiet, their play punctuated by sudden silences that felt heavy with unspoken words. From the moment we arrived at Hinterkaifeck, an unsettling feeling settled over me, a sense of unease that clung to the air like the damp chill of the barn. It wasn't just the isolation or the strange demeanor of the Gruber family. It was something else, something I couldn't quite articulate. A heaviness in the air, a sense of being watched even when we were alone. The first oddity and perhaps the most unsettling was the footprints. The night before our arrival, a fresh blanket of snow had fallen, transforming the farmyard into a pristine white canvas. When we emerged from the house the next morning, we noticed a single set of footprints, clearly defined in the fresh snow. They led to the barn. Not away, just to the barn. The tracks were deep and purposeful, suggesting a man's heavy tread. We followed them, half expecting to find Andreas or Karl Huber already at work, tending to the livestock. But the tracks ended abruptly at the barn door, as if the person had simply vanished into thin air. There were no other footprints leading away, no sign of anyone having left the barn. Probably just old tracks, Hans said, trying to sound nonchalant. He was a year older than me, always trying to project an air of bravado. But I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes, the way he nervously shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Our father, a pragmatic man of few words, simply grunted and pushed open the barn door. The barn was silent. Too silent. Even the animals, usually restless and noisy, seemed subdued, huddled together in their stalls as if seeking comfort in each other's presence. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp hay, manure, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Something metallic, faintly acrid. We searched the barn, calling out for Andreas or Karl Huber, but there was no response. The only sound was the wind whistling through the cracks in the barn walls, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the unsettling silence. We found nothing. No one. The footprints remained a mystery, a chilling riddle etched in the snow, a silent prelude to the horrors that were to come. That night, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundations of the house. The old timbers groaned in protest, and the wind seemed to whisper secrets through the cracks in the walls. I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan sounded like a footstep, every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking presence. I lay in bed, listening to the storm rage outside, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in that house. The next day, things took an even more unsettling turn. We discovered that the attic door lock had been broken. Not forced open but tampered with. Someone had tried to pick it, clumsily, leaving behind scratches and marks on the wood. It was a small detail, but it added to the growing sense of unease. Then, a few days before our arrival, Andreas had found a newspaper clipping about a local unsolved double murder. He'd shown it to Hans, his face etched with worry. He hadn't shown it to anyone else as far as we knew. He just tucked the clipping away in his pocket, a grim reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the boundaries of their isolated farm. And then there were the missing tools. A mattock, a heavy tool used for digging and chopping, usually kept in the shed, was gone. Andreas seemed visibly agitated when he noticed it was missing. He searched the shed, muttering to himself, his brow furrowed even deeper than usual. He didn't say much to us, just muttered something about misplaced things, but I could see the worry in his eyes. The atmosphere at Hinterkaifeck was becoming increasingly oppressive, thick with unspoken fears and hidden tensions. The Grobers were even more withdrawn than usual, their silence punctuated by nervous glances and hushed whispers. They barely spoke to each other, let alone to us. Victoria, in particular, seemed on edge, her eyes darting around as if she expected something terrible to happen at any moment. One evening, I overheard Andreas and Karl Huber arguing in the kitchen. Their voices were low and tense, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The only word I caught was money. They stopped abruptly when they realized I was nearby, their faces flushing with anger and embarrassment. But the air between them was thick with unspoken resentment, a palpable tension that crackled in the silence. I started to feel a genuine fear, not just unease but a deep, primal dread. Something was wrong at Hinterkaifeck. Terribly wrong. The silence itself seemed to hum with a dark energy, a premonition of some unspeakable horror. The day before the murders, I saw Kazilia, the older woman, standing by the well. She was staring into the dark water, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to reach beyond the surface of the well and into some unseen abyss. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, or perhaps something even more terrifying. I approached her cautiously, asking if she was all right. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a terror I'd never seen before, a raw, primal fear that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible above the wind. "They're coming for us." I didn't understand what she meant. Who was coming? But her fear was contagious, a chilling wave that washed over me, leaving me cold and breathless. It sent a shiver down my spine, a premonition of the darkness that was about to engulf Hinterkaifeck. That night, the storm returned, even fiercer than before. The wind howled like a tormented spirit, the rain lashed against the windows, and the house seemed to groan in protest, as if it was trying to shake off the evil that had taken root within its walls. I lay awake, listening to the storm, my heart pounding in my chest, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something terrible was about to happen. The silence of Hinterkaifeck, already heavy with unspoken secrets and simmering tensions, was about to be shattered. The storm raged on, a symphony of destruction played out against the backdrop of the farm's isolation. I tossed and turned in my bed, unable to escape the feeling of impending doom. Every gust of wind, every creak of the house, seemed to whisper of the darkness that was closing in. I thought of Kazilia's whispered warning, "They're coming," and a cold dread settled in my stomach. Who were they? And what did they want? Sleep finally claimed me, but it was a restless, troubled sleep, filled with nightmares of shadowy figures lurking in the barn and the chilling silence of the farmyard broken only by the mournful cry of the wind. I dreamt of the footprints in the snow, leading to nowhere, and the missing mattock, a dark symbol of some unknown violence. I awoke with a start, the storm still raging outside. The first rays of dawn were beginning to filter through the clouds, casting a pale, eerie light over the farm. I glanced at Hans, who was still asleep, his face pale and drawn. I felt a strong urge to leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of Hinterkaifeck, but I knew we couldn't just abandon our father. We went downstairs, and the house was eerily quiet. The storm had subsided slightly, but the wind still howled outside, a constant reminder of the darkness that surrounded us. We found our father in the kitchen making coffee. He looked tired, but he didn't say anything about the storm or the strange feeling that hung in the air. We ate breakfast in silence, the only sound the clinking of our utensils and the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows. The Grobers were nowhere to be seen. We assumed they were already out working on the farm, but there was an unsettling stillness about the house, a silence that felt heavier than usual. After breakfast, our father told us to go out and start clearing the snow from the barn entrance. Hans and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we did as we were told. As we stepped outside, the cold air hit us like a slap in the face. The farmyard was covered in a fresh layer of snow, and the footprints from the previous days were now completely obscured. We started shoveling the snow, our breath misting in the cold air. The silence was unnerving. Even the animals seemed to be keeping quiet. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but there was no one there. We had cleared most of the snow from the barn entrance when Hans suddenly stopped and pointed to something in the snow. It was a single set of footprints, leading to the barn. Just like before. My heart began to pound in my chest. The tracks were fresh, made sometime during the night. "They're back," Hans whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the footprints, a cold dread creeping over me. We followed the tracks to the barn door, and just like before, they ended abruptly. We exchanged a look of fear and confusion. Who was going into the barn in the middle of the night? And why were they only going to the barn, not away? We hesitated for a moment, then Hans pushed open the barn door. The silence inside was even more oppressive than before. The air was thick with the same metallic smell I had noticed before, only stronger now. We called out for Andreas or Karl Huber, but there was no response. As we ventured further into the barn, the silence was broken by a sudden, sickening thud. It sounded like something heavy falling to the ground. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. The sound had come from the back of the barn. Slowly, cautiously, we made our way towards the sound. And then we saw it. The air in the barn hung heavy, thick with the cloying sweetness of death. It wasn't the clean, sterile smell of a hospital, but something earthy, primal, a scent that burrowed into your nostrils and clung to the back of your throat. Mixed with the familiar barnyard aromas of hay and manure was something else, something metallic and sickeningly sweet, the unmistakable odor of blood. It was a smell I would never forget, a smell that would forever be intertwined with the memory of what I saw that day. The scene that unfolded before us was a tableau of horror, a grotesque masterpiece painted in blood and terror. It was as if some malevolent artist had taken the idyllic setting of a rural farm and twisted it into a macabre parody of life. The Gruber family, once vibrant and full of life, were now mere puppets, their strings cut by an unseen hand. Andreas, the sturdy patriarch, lay face down in the straw, his body contorted at an unnatural angle. His head was a mess, a grotesque ruin of bone and flesh. I couldn't bring myself to look at it for long. Nearby, Kazilia, his wife, lay curled on her side, her frail body crumpled like a discarded rag doll. Her eyes, wide and vacant, stared up at the rafters, as if searching for an escape from the nightmare that had engulfed her. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, a testament to the terror she must have felt in her final moments. Victoria, their daughter, lay on her back, her arms outstretched as if reaching for something, or perhaps pushing away the horror that was upon her. Her throat had been brutally slashed, a gaping wound that oozed blood onto the straw. Her eyes, like her mother's, were wide open, reflecting the terror of her final moments. Karl Huber, her husband, was slumped against the barn wall, his head lolling to the side, resting on his chest. A dark, gaping wound marred his forehead, a brutal testament to the force of the attack. And then there were the children. Joseph, the bright-eyed boy who had always greeted us with a shy smile, lay huddled near his father, his small body twisted and broken. His face, once so full of life, was now frozen in an expression of pure terror. Little Kazilia, the toddler, lay nearby, her tiny body almost hidden beneath her mother's outstretched arm. Her face too was a mask of fear, her eyes wide and unseeing. The innocence of childhood had been brutally stolen from them, their lives extinguished in a whirlwind of violence. The air in the barn was thick with the coppery tang of blood, the metallic smell I had noticed before, now overpowering and nauseating. The silence, once oppressive, was now shattered, replaced by the ringing in my ears and the frantic pounding of my heart. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me and I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The world seemed to spin, the barn swaying around me like a drunken sailor. Hans, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own, let out a choked cry, a sound that was half sob, half scream. He staggered back, bumping into me, and we both fell to the ground, our legs suddenly weak and useless. We scrambled away from the gruesome scene, our eyes fixed on the mangled bodies, our minds struggling to comprehend the sheer brutality of what we had witnessed. It was as if we had stumbled into some dark, twisted version of reality, a nightmare made flesh. We stumbled out of the barn, gasping for air, our lungs burning with the cold, our minds reeling with shock and disbelief. We ran to the house, our voices hoarse with fear, our words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless. We burst through the door, our faces pale and our bodies trembling. Our father, his face grim and his eyes filled with a chilling resolve, immediately took charge. He didn't ask what we saw, he knew. He told us to stay in the house, to lock the doors and windows and to not let anyone in. His voice was firm, his gaze steady, but I could see the fear lurking in the depths of his eyes. He then grabbed his rifle, a hunting rifle he kept for protecting the livestock, and headed out to the barn, his footsteps heavy and determined. We watched from the window, our hearts pounding in our chests, our ears straining for any sound. We saw him approach the barn cautiously, his rifle raised, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. He disappeared inside and we waited, our breath held tight in our lungs, our minds filled with images of the carnage we had just witnessed. Minutes stretched into an eternity, and the silence of the farmyard was broken only by the mournful cry of the wind, a sound that seemed to mock our fear. Finally, our father emerged from the barn, his face pale and his shoulders slumped. He walked slowly towards the house, his rifle now lowered, his eyes fixed on the ground as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He entered the house and we rushed to him, our voices filled with questions, our eyes searching his face for answers. "They're all dead," he said, his voice hollow, devoid of emotion. "Every one of them." He didn't need to say more. We knew. We had seen it with our own eyes. He then described what he had seen inside the barn, confirming the horrors we had witnessed. He told us that the murder weapon appeared to be a mattock, the same tool that had been missing from the shed. He also said that there were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. It was as if the family had simply ceased to exist, wiped out in an act of unimaginable violence, leaving behind only silence and the lingering scent of death. The silence that descended upon Wang after the discovery of the Hinterkaifeck massacre was a suffocating blanket, heavier and more chilling than any blizzard. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping village, but a tense, watchful stillness, pregnant with unspoken fears and festering suspicions. The news, carried on the wind and whispered from house to house, spread through the community like a contagion, infecting every conversation, fueling every rumor, and transforming familiar faces into objects of suspicion. The Gruber family, once a quiet, almost invisible presence on the outskirts of the village, became, in death, the subject of intense scrutiny, their lives dissected and reassembled into narratives of intrigue and darkness. The initial horror and disbelief that gripped the villagers quickly morphed into a morbid fascination. The gruesome details of the murders, exaggerated and embellished with each retelling, became a source of macabre entertainment, a chilling campfire story whispered in hushed tones. Every detail of the Grubers' lives, from their withdrawn demeanor to their financial dealings, was scrutinized, analyzed, and twisted to fit the emerging narratives of suspicion. The Grubers, in death, became an open book, their every action, every word, every perceived eccentricity mined for clues, for explanations, for someone to blame. Theories sprouted like weeds in a neglected garden, each one more outlandish than the last. Some whispered that the Grubers had been involved in something illicit, that they had attracted the attention of dangerous individuals, and that their deaths were a brutal form of retribution. The rumors ranged from petty theft to involvement in organized crime, painting the Grubers as figures operating on the fringes of society, their isolated farm a hub of clandestine activity. Others, more superstitious, spoke of curses and dark omens, claiming that the Hinterkaifeck farm was built on cursed land, that the Grubers had somehow angered some malevolent spirit, and that their annihilation was a form of supernatural justice. Suspicion, like a creeping vine, wrapped itself around every member of the community. Neighbors who had once shared friendly greetings now eyed each other with distrust, wondering if the killer could be living among them, hiding in plain sight. Old grudges, long buried beneath the veneer of civility, resurfaced, and long-forgotten disputes were re-examined, each perceived slight, each whispered insult, becoming a potential motive for murder. The once familiar landscape of Wang was now a minefield of suspicion, where every shadow seemed to conceal a potential killer. The investigators, tasked with unraveling this horrific puzzle, found themselves navigating a labyrinth of rumors and hearsay, struggling to separate fact from fiction. They interviewed every villager, meticulously documenting their accounts, searching for a thread of truth in the tangled web of speculation. But the villagers, while eager to share their theories and suspicions, offered little in the way of concrete evidence. Their stories were often contradictory, colored by their personal biases and prejudices, making it difficult for the investigators to discern what was real and what was merely conjecture. One name that consistently surfaced in the conversations was that of Karl Huber, Victoria's husband. He was a man of few words, his silence often interpreted as arrogance or hostility. He was an outsider, having come to Hinterkaifeck from another village, and he never fully integrated into the community. Rumors circulated about his past, whispers of a violent temper, of bar fights and drunken brawls. And then there were the whispers about his finances, rumors that he was deeply in debt, that he had borrowed heavily from Andreas and was struggling to repay it. Could Karl Huber have killed his own family for money? It was a dark and disturbing thought, but the investigators couldn't dismiss it. Another figure who attracted suspicion was Sepp, a former farmhand who had been dismissed by Andreas a few months prior to the murders. Sepp was known to have a volatile temper, and there were whispers that he had threatened Andreas after being fired, vowing revenge. He had also been spotted in the vicinity of the farm on the night of the murders, or so some villagers claimed. Could Sepp have returned to Hinterkaifeck to carry out his threat? It was another avenue that the investigators had to explore. The investigators also delved into the possibility of a connection to the unsolved double murder that Andreas had been reading about shortly before the tragedy. The newspaper clipping, a grim foreshadowing of the horrors to come, had been found tucked away in his pocket. Some villagers claimed that Andreas had been unusually preoccupied with the case, that he had spent hours discussing it with anyone who would listen. Could the Hinterkaifeck murders be the work of the same individual, a serial killer stalking the Bavarian countryside? It was a terrifying prospect, but the investigators found no clear links between the two cases. As the investigation dragged on, the atmosphere in Wang grew increasingly toxic. The once close-knit community was now fractured by suspicion and distrust. Families were divided by conflicting theories and accusations, old friendships were strained, and the village, once a haven of tranquility, was now a hotbed of paranoia. The rumors about the Grubers' alleged involvement in illegal activities persisted, fueled by speculation and innuendo. Some villagers claimed to have witnessed suspicious comings and goings at the farm late at night, shadowy figures slipping in and out of the barn. Others whispered of strange noises emanating from the farm, sounds that could not be explained by the usual farmyard activities. These rumors, while unsubstantiated, added to the growing sense of mystery and unease surrounding the case, painting the Grubers as figures operating in the shadows, their farm a place of secrets and hidden agendas. The investigators, despite their tireless efforts, found themselves hitting dead ends at every turn. The lack of concrete evidence, the conflicting testimonies, and the pervasive atmosphere of fear and suspicion hampered their progress. They were like blind men groping in the dark, searching for a light that seemed to constantly recede before them. The sighting of the shadowy figure by Frau Schmidt, the elderly woman who lived near the farm, offered a brief flicker of hope. Her description, though vague, seemed to corroborate some of the rumors circulating in the village. The investigators meticulously questioned Frau Schmidt, hoping to glean more details about the figure she had seen, but her memory was hazy, and her description remained frustratingly imprecise. The figure, like a phantom, remained elusive, a fleeting glimpse in the darkness. The Hinterkaifeck murders became a knot of loose threads, a puzzle with crucial pieces missing, a chilling testament to the limitations of early 20th century forensic science and the enduring power of silence. The initial flurry of activity, the influx of investigators descending upon the isolated farm like vultures to a carcass, gradually subsided, leaving behind a lingering sense of frustration and a growing realization that the truth might forever remain buried beneath the Bavarian snow. The mattock, the grim instrument of death, became a symbol of the investigation's futility. Its rough-hewn handle, worn smooth by countless hours of labor, offered no purchase for the nascent science of fingerprinting. The investigators meticulously dusted the handle, hoping to find a clear print, a single clue that could point them towards the killer. But the results were disappointing. The wood, porous and aged, had absorbed any fingerprints, leaving only a faint smudge too indistinct to be of any use. The metal head of the mattock, despite being stained with blood and hair, also yielded nothing. Perhaps the killer had wiped it clean, anticipating the possibility of fingerprints. Or perhaps the prints, if they existed, were simply too degraded to be of any value. The mattock, despite its gruesome significance, remained stubbornly silent. The footprints, those initial harbingers of dread that had so unnerved us, proved equally elusive. The fresh snowfall that had preserved them so clearly had also become their undoing. The subsequent trampling by investigators, curious onlookers, and even the Grubers' own livestock had churned the snow, obliterating any clear impressions. The investigators attempted to cast the footprints, hoping to preserve them for further analysis, but the melting snow and the constant disruption made this a near impossible task. Any hope of determining the size of the killer's shoes, the pattern of their tread, or any other identifying characteristics quickly vanished, leaving only a frustrating reminder of what might have been. The farmhouse itself, the stage for this horrific tragedy, was meticulously searched, every room scrutinized, every object examined. The investigators hoped to find some clue, some hidden motive, some indication of what had transpired in those final, terrifying hours. They meticulously documented the scene, photographing every detail, collecting every piece of potential evidence. They sifted through the Gruber family's belongings, searching for anything that might shed light on their lives, their relationships, their secrets. They examined their financial records, hoping to uncover any sign of debt or financial trouble that might have driven someone to such desperate measures. But the house remained stubbornly silent, offering no answers, only a chilling echo of the violence that had occurred within its walls. The interviews conducted with neighbors, friends, and even distant relatives painted a picture of a family shrouded in an almost impenetrable silence. The Grubers were described as reclusive, keeping to themselves, rarely interacting with the other villagers. They were known to be hardworking and frugal, but they were also seen as somewhat strange, their quiet demeanor often mistaken for aloofness or even hostility. No one seemed to know them well, and no one could offer any insight into who might have wanted to harm them. They were a family of whispers and shadows, their lives a closed book to the outside world. The investigators delved into the Gruber family's past, meticulously tracing their lineage, searching for any hint of conflict or trouble. They discovered that Andreas had inherited the farm from his father, and that there had been some disputes with other family members over the inheritance. However, these disputes seemed to have been resolved years ago, and there was no indication that they could have any connection to the murders. They were simply the common squabbles of family inheritance, long since settled. They also learned that Andreas had a reputation for being a stern and demanding man, and that he had had disagreements with some of his former employees. These were mostly minor disputes, disagreements over wages or working conditions, nothing that seemed significant enough to warrant such extreme violence. Andreas was a hard man, yes, but not a man who seemed to inspire the kind of rage that would lead to murder. The psychological profiling of the potential killer or killers became a subject of much debate among the investigators. What kind of person could commit such a brutal and seemingly senseless crime? The sheer savagery of the attack, the methodical nature of the killings, and the fact that the killer had remained at the farm for several days afterward suggested a level of coldness and calculation that was truly chilling. It wasn't a crime of passion, a sudden outburst of rage. It was something far more deliberate, far more sinister. Some investigators theorized that the killer was likely someone with a history of violence, perhaps someone with a mental illness, a psychopath driven by uncontrollable urges. Others believed that the killer could be someone closer to the family, someone who had been harboring a deep resentment towards them, a grudge that had festered and finally erupted in a storm of violence. But without any concrete evidence, these were just theories, speculation based on the gruesome nature of the crime itself. The fact that the killer or killers had stayed at the farm for several days after the murders added another layer of complexity to the case. This suggested a level of coldness and calculation that was truly chilling. It was as if the killer had not only murdered the family but had also wanted to erase their existence, to assume their lives. They ate their food, slept in their beds, tended to their livestock. It was a grotesque mimicry of family life, a chilling reminder of the killer's complete disregard for human life. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. The initial leads had dried up, and the investigators found themselves facing a wall of silence. The lack of any clear motive, the absence of any concrete evidence, and the sheer brutality of the crime left them grasping at straws. The Hinterkaifeck murders became a symbol of the dark, unknowable forces that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most peaceful communities. It was a case that seemed destined to remain unsolved, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can sometimes prevail. The Hinterkaifeck murders. The very name evokes a chill, a sense of unease that transcends the passage of time. Decades have passed since that horrific night in 1922, yet the case remains stubbornly unsolved, a chilling testament to the enduring power of mystery and the frustrating limitations of human understanding. The questions, like restless spirits, continue to haunt us, whispering in the wind, echoing in the silence of the abandoned farmhouse. Who committed this unspeakable act? This is the central question, the anchor of the mystery, the query that has consumed countless hours of investigation and speculation. Was it a single individual, driven by a rage so profound that it could extinguish an entire family? Or was it a group, A conspiracy of silence bound together by some dark secret? The sheer brutality of the murders suggests a level of violence that seems almost inhuman, a ferocity that is difficult to comprehend. Was it the work of a psychopath, a mind twisted by some dark pathology? Or was it someone closer to the family, someone who had been harboring a deep resentment, a grudge that finally erupted in a storm of violence? The lack of forced entry, the absence of any signs of a struggle, adds another layer of complexity to the puzzle. It suggests that the family knew their killer, that they willingly opened their doors to the person who would ultimately become their executioner. This chilling realization raises even more questions. Who could they have trusted so implicitly? Who among their acquaintances, their neighbors, their own family, could have been capable of such monstrous cruelty? The motive, or the apparent lack thereof, is perhaps the most perplexing aspect of the case. What could possibly justify such a brutal annihilation? Robbery seems unlikely, as nothing of significant value was taken from the farm. Revenge, while a possibility, seems insufficient to explain the sheer savagery of the attack. Was it a crime of passion, a sudden outburst of rage triggered by some unknown event? Or was it something far more sinister, a premeditated act of violence driven by some dark and twisted motive that remains hidden to this day? The fact that the killer, or killers, remained at the farm for several days after the murders, tending to the livestock, eating the family's food, even sleeping in their beds, adds a truly chilling dimension to the mystery. This behavior suggests a level of coldness and calculation that is deeply disturbing. It's as if the killer wasn't content with simply taking the family's lives. They wanted to erase their existence, to assume their place, to mock their memory. What could possibly explain such macabre behavior? Was it a form of psychological manipulation, a way to further torment the victims even in death? Or was it something more primal, a desire to absorb the family's essence, to somehow become them? The various theories that have been proposed over the years offer little in the way of definitive answers. Each theory has its strengths and weaknesses, its proponents and detractors. The theory of a disgruntled employee, while plausible, fails to explain the lack of any concrete evidence linking any former farmhand to the crime. The theory of a stranger, a drifter who stumbled upon the farm and went on a killing spree, seems equally unlikely, given the isolated location of Hinterkaifeck and the lack of any similar crimes in the area. The theory that a member of the family was responsible, while disturbing, cannot be dismissed. The arguments between Andreas and Karl Huber, the rumors of financial difficulties, and the general atmosphere of tension within the family suggest that there may have been hidden resentments, simmering beneath the surface. However, there is no concrete evidence to implicate any specific family member, and the sheer brutality of the murders makes it difficult to imagine that even the most deeply troubled individual could be capable of such horrific acts. And then there are the more outlandish theories, the whispers of curses, rituals, and supernatural forces. These theories, while dismissed by most investigators, continue to circulate among those who are drawn to the darker side of human history. They speak of ancient evils, of malevolent spirits that haunt the Hinterkaifeck farm, of a dark legacy that has been passed down through generations. While these theories may seem far-fetched, they tap into a primal fear of the unknown, a sense that there are forces at work in the world that we cannot understand, forces that can reach out and touch us in ways that defy logic and reason. The limitations of forensic science in the 1920s undoubtedly played a significant role in the failure to solve the Hinterkaifeck murders. The absence of DNA testing, the rudimentary fingerprinting techniques, and the lack of sophisticated crime scene analysis tools hampered the investigators' efforts. They were left with circumstantial evidence, unreliable witness accounts, and a host of unanswered questions. Perhaps the truth is lost forever, buried with the Gruber family in the silent earth. Perhaps the killer, or killers, took their secrets to the grave, leaving behind only a legacy of horror and a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the human heart. The unanswered questions of Hinterkaifeck serve as a haunting reminder of the fragility of life, the enduring power of mystery, and the chilling reality that some crimes may simply be unsolvable. The silence of Hinterkaifeck continues to scream, a testament to the darkness that consumed a family and the questions that remain unanswered. The Hinterkaifeck murders. Even today, the name resonates with a chilling weight, a dark stain on the tapestry of Bavarian history. It's more than just an unsolved crime. It's a chilling legend, a story whispered in hushed tones, a source of morbid fascination that has captivated generations. The case has transcended its historical context, becoming a symbol of the darkness that can lurk in the most isolated and seemingly peaceful corners of the world, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the unknown. The abandoned farmhouse at Hinterkaifeck, a skeletal frame against the backdrop of the Bavarian countryside, has become a macabre landmark. Despite its dilapidated state, it draws visitors from all over the world, drawn by the irresistible pull of the unsolved mystery. Trespassers, fueled by curiosity and a morbid fascination, venture onto the property, seeking to connect with the tragedy, to feel the lingering chill of the past. They walk through the crumbling rooms, imagining the lives that were so brutally extinguished, searching for some tangible clue, some whisper from the grave. They take photographs, capturing the decaying structure, the overgrown fields, the silent barn, preserving the image of desolation for posterity. The farmhouse, a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded within its walls, has become a monument to the unsolved mystery, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can reside within the human heart. The Hinterkaifeck murders have also become a popular subject in books, documentaries, podcasts, and online forums. Armchair detectives, amateur sleuths, and true crime enthusiasts from around the globe pore over the details of the case, dissecting the evidence, debating the various theories, and offering their own interpretations of the events. They meticulously scrutinize the police reports, analyze the witness statements, and delve into the historical context, searching for some overlooked detail, some hidden clue that could finally unlock the mystery. The internet has become a virtual gathering place for these amateur investigators, a forum for sharing information, debating theories, and keeping the memory of the Hinterkaifeck murders alive. The case has become a collaborative puzzle, with each online sleuth contributing their piece to the larger picture, hoping to be the one to finally crack the code. The enduring fascination with the case can be attributed to a confluence of factors. The sheer brutality of the murders, the seemingly motiveless nature of the crime, and the lack of a clear suspect all contribute to the mystery's allure. The isolated setting of the farm, the eerie silence that surrounds it, and the lingering sense of dread that permeates the area further enhance the case's mystique. And the fact that the case remains unsolved, that the killer or killers were never brought to justice, adds a chilling dimension to the story, leaving a lingering sense of unease and a gnawing desire for closure. The Hinterkaifeck murders also tap into a deeper, more primal fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary people. The idea that a family could be so brutally murdered in their own home, that such unimaginable violence could erupt in the quiet countryside, is deeply unsettling. It challenges our sense of security, reminding us that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the places we consider most safe. It shatters the illusion of safety and reminds us of the unpredictable nature of violence. The case also raises profound questions about the nature of justice and the limitations of human understanding. The fact that the killer or killers were never apprehended, that they were able to escape justice and disappear without a trace, is deeply frustrating. It leaves a lingering sense of injustice, a feeling that the victims were not properly avenged. And it highlights the limitations of our ability to understand the motivations behind such horrific acts, the dark and twisted pathways of the human mind. It underscores the fact that sometimes, despite our best efforts, answers remain elusive, and justice remains out of reach. The legacy of the Hinterkaifeck murders is a complex tapestry woven with threads of fear, fascination, and unanswered questions. It's a story that continues to haunt us, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist in the world. The case serves as a testament to the enduring power of mystery, the human desire to understand the inexplicable, and the relentless quest for justice. While the truth about what happened at Hinterkaifeck may never be fully known, the story continues to be told, keeping the memory of the Gruber family alive and ensuring that their tragic fate is not forgotten. The whispers persist, the speculation continues, and the mystery endures. And now we turn to you, our viewers. What do you think happened at Hinterkaifeck? Do you have any theories of your own? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about unsolved mysteries, true crime stories, and other chilling tales, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future uploads. We rely on your support to keep bringing you these stories. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Let's keep the conversation going. Perhaps together we can uncover a new clue, a fresh perspective, that could finally shed light on this enduring mystery. Thank you for watching.